The Idaho Statesman newspaper is reporting that the suspect in those horrific 2022 killings of 4 University of Idaho students has just accepted a plea deal. Let's get right to CNN's Gene Casares, also joining us, Laura Coates. Gene, first to you. What are we learning about the plea deal? How did it come about?
Well, what we're learning, the Idaho Statements is getting this, citing letters that were sent to the family members, and what is being reported by them is that a plea deal was reached in this death penalty case. You know, I've covered this case from the beginning in Pennsylvania, and as the evidence and the discovery kept going back and forth and the pretrial motions kept being heard and the orders were issued, any defense that Kohberger had was wedged away bit by bit by bit. And the
Bryan Kohberger didn't get death row, but what he's facing now might be something even more punishing. There's no execution date, no final words, no last meal, just silence and time. Endless, unchanging time. Locked behind layers of reinforced steel and concrete, Bryan isn't waiting to die, he's simply being erased. There are no cameras now, no lawyers, no trial drama. Just a man alone in a box the size of a walk-in closet, watched constantly, spoken to rarely, and touched by no one. For someone who once lived by structure, routine, and control, this is hell in slow motion. He wakes up every day at the same hour, eats the same bland meals, stares at the same blank walls. There's no escape. Not even in sleep. The lights barely dim. The silence never ends. The walls don't talk, but they echo, reminding him with every second that the world he once knew is gone. Some believe avoiding the death penalty means he got off easy. But the truth, what Bryan faces inside that cell isn't mercy. It's psychological decay. A punishment not measured in years, but in isolation, routine, and the slow erosion of the mind. This is the reality after the trial, after the headlines faded, after justice was served. Bryan Kohberger isn't just serving a life sentence. He's living in a place where time stands still. The courtroom was packed. Families of the victims sat in quiet agony, while journalists filled every seat, waiting for a headline.
Raw emotion at the sentencing of the monster Bryan Kohberger.
I will call you what you are. Sociopath, psychopath, murderer.
The grieving families of his victims finally got their chance to confront the killer in court. Stephen Gonsalves, Kaylee's father, turned the podium himself so he could speak directly to Kohberger. He scoffed at the mistakes left behind by the criminology PhD student who thought he had committed the perfect crime.
Within minutes, they had your DNA, like a calling card. You were that careless, that foolish, that stupid. Master degree, you're a joke, complete joke. The world's watching because of the kids, not because of you. Nobody cares about you.
Kaylee's sister, Olivia, demanded to know the answers to the outstanding questions about the case.
Where is the murder weapon? The clothes you wore that night? What were Kaylee's last words?
She also berated him to his face.
The truth is, you're as dumb as they come. Stupid, clumsy, slow, sloppy, weak, dirty. If you hadn't attacked them in their sleep, in the middle of the night, like a pedophile, Kaylee would have kicked your ass.
The packed courtroom broke into applause. Kaylee's mother mocked Kohberger's future life in prison.
You are officially the property of the state of Idaho, where your fellow inmates are anxiously awaiting your arrival.
The atmosphere inside the courtroom
were murdered. The foundation fell out of our world. I ache for the loss of the dreams that she and her true love, Jake, held.
Xander Kernodle's stepdad didn't hold back.
You're evil. There's no place for you in heaven. You took our children. You are gonna suffer, man. I'm shaking because I want to reach out to you, but I hope you feel my energy, okay? Go to hell.
Xana's aunt, who says she's turned to God in her grief, stunned the court by forgiving him.
Bryan, I'm here today to tell you I have forgiven you.
Kohberger wore an orange prison uniform and shackles, in contrast with his preppy look when he last appeared in court. But he showed no flicker of emotion, and his face holding that same chilling deadpan effect. When the judge gave him a chance to speak, Kohberger had this to say.
These innocent souls.
And then the White House his fate.
Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole.
At the center of it all sat Bryan Kohberger, expressionless, still, unmoved. No tears, no apologies, just the cold gaze of a man disconnected from the chaos his name had come to represent. He had been charged with the horrific murders of 4 University of Idaho students, a crime so violent, so calculated, it left an entire town frozen in grief and a nation demanding justice. The evidence against him was staggering. DNA, surveillance, cell phone data. Piece by piece, the prosecution built a case that left little doubt. But Bryan didn't blink. He barely moved. He never once looked back at the families whose lives he had shattered. When the moment came, the judge didn't mince words. Life in prison. Not 1, but 4 life sentences without parole. For each life stolen, a life taken in return, behind bars. The room was silent. Some expected the death penalty, others braced for it, but it never came. Instead, a deal had been struck behind closed doors. Avoid years of appeals, spare the families more pain, and in return, exile. Permanent, inescapable, invisible exile. There was no outburst, no drama, no closure. Just a sentence that promised one thing. Bryan Kohberger would never walk free again. And the real punishment? It hadn't even started yet. There were no headlines when it happened. No reporters chasing the van, no press conference. Just a cold, silent handoff in the dead of night. After sentencing, Bryan Kohberger was quietly moved from county jail to a high-security state prison. The exact date? Kept secret. The route? Unmarked. The van? Armored, sealed, flanked by officers in tactical gear. They treated him not just as a convict, but as a risk, a threat, a man whose name still echoed across the country. There were no goodbyes, no bags to pack. Everything he owned was already gone. His books, his notes, his college dreams, all of it left behind. Inmates like Bryan don't get closure. They get relocated. The moment he arrived, it was all procedure. Strip-searched, photographed, fingerprinted. His street clothes were taken. In their place, a stiff uniform, prison ID, and a new number. No more name, no more status. Just an entry in the system. He was placed directly into solitary intake. No contact, no conversation, just concrete and rules. Guards monitored him non-stop, scanning for signs of self-harm, escape planning, or retaliation. Every breath, every blink, logged. There was no window in his cell, no mirror, no clock. Time didn't exist here, not in any way that mattered. He had entered a place built not to punish the body, but to dismantle the mind. And that process had just begun. Bryan Kohberger now lives inside a room barely bigger than a walk-in closet, roughly 7 by 10 feet. No windows, no color, just cold concrete, steel, and silence. The door is solid metal with a narrow slot at the bottom for food trays, not freedom. There's no knob, no way to open it from inside. That's by design. The bed is a steel frame bolted to the wall. A thin mattress, barely thicker than a blanket, rests on top. His toilet and sink? Stainless steel. 1 unit. No privacy. Always in view. There's no curtain, no door. Just a reminder that even your most human moments are watched. The lights overhead hum day and night, fluorescent, artificial, unrelenting. They dim slightly in the evening, but they never turn off completely. True darkness doesn't exist here. Neither does silence. There's always a buzz, a click, a metallic echo somewhere down the hallway. There are no personal belongings, no family photos, no clock, no mirror, just blank space and bare walls that don't reflect anything, not even the person inside. A surveillance camera watches him from the corner. It doesn't blink, it doesn't sleep. Every move he makes, lying down, eating, pacing, is recorded. Even his sleep is monitored, just in case he stops breathing or stops trying. Inmates here aren't meant to feel comfortable. They're not meant to feel human. Bryan's cell isn't just a place to live. It's a place designed to erase the idea that he ever lived at all. Every day in Bryan Kohberger's world looks almost identical to the one before it. There are no weekends, no holidays, no days off, just repetition, designed to strip away identity, choice, and any concept of time. He wakes up around 5 a.m. to the sound of metal doors clanging and guards making rounds. There's no alarm clock, no sunlight, just footsteps and keys. Breakfast arrives through the slot in his door, lukewarm, bland, and eaten alone, sitting on a steel bunk with no table, no chair, no company. There's no dining hall, no cafeteria, no voices, just chewing in silence. He's allowed out of his cell for 1 hour a day, if staffing and conditions allow it. That hour is spent in a small caged recreation yard, surrounded by concrete and razor wire. No gym, no equipment, no other inmates, just pacing in circles or standing still, staring up at a sky he can barely see. Showers happen 2 or 3 times a week, each one supervised. Each one starts and ends in shackles. Privacy doesn't exist. His body, his movements, his hygiene, all controlled. The rest of the time, silence. No job, no group therapy, no educational programs. A few books, some writing paper, if approved. No internet, no TV, no updates from the outside world unless filtered through the prison's mailroom. He doesn't talk, he doesn't touch, he doesn't choose, he just exists. This isn't a life built for growth. It's a routine built to erase the man who lived before the cell. Bryan Kohberger is not in general population. He hasn't spoken to other inmates, he hasn't walked a shared corridor, and he never will. Instead, he's locked inside protective custody, a designation meant to keep him alive, but at a very specific cost. On paper, it sounds like security. In reality, it's isolation so deep it borders on psychological torture. Bryan's crimes, allegedly murdering 4 college students in their home, shocked the nation. His name flooded headlines, news reports, podcasts, and documentaries. He's not just an inmate, he's infamous. And that kind of attention comes with a target on your back the moment you enter prison walls. Inside, inmates know who you are. They read, they watch, they listen. In a place where power is traded in fear and reputation, someone like Bryan becomes a prize, a statement. For some lifers, killing a high-profile inmate is a fast track to infamy behind bars. Then there's the nature of his crime. In the prison hierarchy, crimes against women or children are the lowest form of offense. They attract the harshest retaliation. Even hardened killers have an unwritten code, and Bryan has already violated it in their eyes. But the danger doesn't just come from others. It comes from within. Psychologically, Bryan's fall has been catastrophic. He went from PhD student and criminal justice expert to an accused mass murderer shackled in silence with no future. He's facing 4 life sentences with no chance of parole. That kind of sentence can crack a person's will. Suicide is a very real risk, especially in the early stages of confinement. And for prison officials, that's not just a tragedy, it's a liability. If Bryan were to be killed or kill himself, it would be a national story, a legal nightmare, and a stain on the Corrections Department's oversight. So their solution? Bury him in protective custody. Alone, controlled, forgotten. But protection comes at a steep cost. Bryan has no cellmate, no physical contact, no access to group therapy or communal activities. He doesn't participate in prison jobs or programs. Every moment is scheduled, restricted, and silent. He eats alone, showers alone, exercises alone. Even when he leaves his cell, it's in shackles under guard supervision. There are no conversations, no eye contact, no shared humanity. This kind of total isolation strips away something more than freedom. It strips away the mind. Psychologists have long studied the effects of prolonged solitary confinement. Hallucinations, memory loss, paranoia, emotional detachment, depression. In protective custody, time doesn't heal. It distorts. It breaks. So while the world outside thinks Bryan Kohberger escaped the death penalty, the truth is more complicated. He wasn't spared. He was locked inside a cell that may look safe from the outside, but inside it slowly pulls you apart piece by piece. This isn't mercy. This is the price of survival. Inside his tiny concrete cell, Bryan Kohberger is alone. But outside those prison walls, his name still lingers. Whispered in headlines, circulating on forums, tagged in videos. His trial may be over, but public obsession? That's still very much alive. And the Mail proves it. Despite his crimes, despite the horror that trails his name, Bryan still receives letters. Dozens, sometimes more. Some are hate-filled, graphic, written by people who want him to suffer. Others are even stranger, letters from admirers, people who don't just sympathize but fantasize. They send photos, poems, sometimes love notes. It's a phenomenon seen before. Ted Bundy, Richard Ramirez, Chris Watts, and now Bryan Kohberger. Something about the darkness draws people in, not out of forgiveness, but fascination. Some call it hybristophilia, others call it madness, but it's real. Every letter Bryan receives is screened by prison officials. Each page inspected, every envelope opened. Nothing reaches his hands without review. The same goes for anything he sends out, if he's even allowed to respond. He can't do interviews, he can't go live on TV, but people still talk about him, post about him, study him. A man locked away in silence, yet somehow louder than ever. The irony is brutal. The same public that once called for his execution is now feeding the myth that keeps him relevant. For the victims' families, this attention is unbearable. To them, Bryan isn't a puzzle to solve or a character to analyze. He's the face of unspeakable loss. And every mention, every click, every video thumbnail rips that wound open again. But for Bryan, there's no fame to enjoy, no validation, no control. The letters come, the world talks, but inside that cell, none of it matters. He can't reply, he can't explain. He's trapped in a space where his name may echo, but his voice means nothing. Public obsession has turned him into a symbol, but symbols don't feel, and Bryan Kohberger is still very much alive inside a box where silence is constant and attention changes nothing. In the end, there was no dramatic outburst, no desperate plea for forgiveness, no last-minute confession, just the mechanical voice of the court reading out Bryan Kohberger's fate. 4 consecutive life sentences, no possibility of parole, no second chance, no future. Each sentence matched to a life taken, one for Madison, one for Kaylee, one for Xana, one for Ethan. 4 young souls, brutally silenced in a home that was supposed to be safe. Now their names live on in court records, while the man who took them fades into concrete silence. Many believed the death penalty was inevitable. The brutality of the crime, the weight of evidence, the national outrage, it all pointed toward execution. But the prosecutors made a different choice. A plea deal. It wasn't forgiveness, it was finality. Instead of forcing the families through years of appeals, retrials, and painful courtroom moments, the state struck a deal. Bryan would give up his right to ever walk free again, and in return, he would be spared the death chamber. Some called it justice, others called it mercy. But for the victims' loved ones, it was neither. It was simply survival. They wouldn't have to sit through another trial, they wouldn't have to relive every detail, but they also wouldn't get the closure that comes with a last breath, a final date, a legal end. Bryan Kohberger didn't get a needle. He got something colder, something slower. A life inside a cell where nothing changes and nothing ends. The cameras shut off, the reporters moved on. But for the families, and for Bryan, this sentence was only the beginning.